Hey everybody, how's it going? All right, Ned's here, that's for sure. So I was saying this earlier, but if you guys could come a little bit closer, that would help me out. It'll make it easier to pass mics when you guys have questions. But if you guys really feel like I need more exercise, it's fine. But I would really appreciate it if you just take like 30 seconds, move slightly closer. I believe in you guys. I think standing up is a thing that all of you can do. Like, yeah, you're close enough. Anybody behind him, not close enough. All right. There you go. You guys are doing it. This is great. Come on. All right. Activity. This is great. People moving. So I imagine you guys mostly know why you're here. My name's Feanil Patel. I work on the DevOps team at edX, the company. I contribute a lot to the configuration repo, care a lot about deployments and getting things deployed out to the world. These are other people that also have like a lot of some deployment experience of different kinds. And so hopefully we'll get a good conversation going about the problems people face, the way that we do it, the things that are big issues and the things that are awesome about it. So I'm going to start off by just asking them to introduce themselves and just talk a little bit about like what size deployments you have, who your audience is, and sort of start with that to give people an idea of the kinds of things you're working with. So can you start off with Pierre?
Yeah, my name is Pierre Mayotte. I'm with the Université de Montréal in Montréal, Quebec, Canada. We have a small installation of edX in AWS. We've got a production environment, a test environment, and we've got insights on a separate server. We manage courses for three institutions at the Université de Montréal. First for Université de Montréal, then for École Polytechnique, which is our business school, and École Polytechnique, which is our engineering school, and École Hautes Études Commerciales, which is our business school.
My name is Christy Henriksen. I'm with Microsoft. We're currently running a pilot of hosting OpenEdX on Azure. What we're looking at doing is, well, the pilot is really just running a single MOOC right now targeted at internal employees. But we're really looking at kind of hosting it as a platform to use in the future to kind of merge some legacy systems onto there. And our content authors have fallen in love with OpenEdX, so we're sort of moving in that direction.
I'm Vijay Gadapalli. I'm at MIT. I'm with Lincoln Laboratory in the Computer Science and AI Lab. We probably a little bit different in that more on the research side. We've done a couple of courses. And I think over the past year or so, we've kind of gotten ourselves a little bit smarter on how to deploy OpenEdX instances. Our things tend to be a little bit small, but we run them on our own hardware. So to give you an example, we have an introduction to high performance computing course at the Lincoln Laboratory Supercomputing Center. And we actually like to run the course on the HPC system for a couple of reasons. One, we own hardware. It's extremely powerful. Why wouldn't we do that? And the other, because we do a lot more of hands-on. At least a lot of the courses that we do is about bringing people to the tools itself. So when we're teaching people how to do high-performance computing, it's sort of silly to have them take a course one place and then have to actually practice doing it somewhere else, or trying to teach them skills in one environment that doesn't translate to the next environment. The other couple of things, I made a couple notes, is we're often not centralized, so we work in a lot of resource-constrained environments. So very often we're trying to deploy OpenEdX on a tablet or a laptop or something that will never touch the internet again, except for the time that we put it there, or ideally not even then, that it's on a system that we should be able to deploy OpenEdX from a hard drive, ideally, or a CD or a DVD. So that leads to a number of challenges, as I'm sure many in the room are aware. And so that's sort of one thing. Let me just see if I had, yep, and more recently we're looking at, and the reason that we really like the OpenEdX platform, and thank you to all the developers in the audience over here. Your work has been, we definitely use it. We want to help contribute back to it. But it really helps us as we do more grant proposals, as we talk to different agencies, and I'm sure many here in the STEM fields kind of understand the value of being able to take the work that you've done, research that you've done, and give that back to the community in the way that they understand. So the OpenEdX platform helps us do that in sort of they're not traditional classes, as they're much more shorter than maybe a full semester long course that we would normally do. But that's really helpful, and this platform makes it very easy for us to take the research that we've done, work with researchers who haven't necessarily done courses before, quick turnaround. And just as a last thing, and I'll keep quiet after this, I can go on for the whole hour, but I'll try.
My goal is for the three of you to do most of the talking. So
just as a last, shout out, we have a couple of our colleagues over here who are both speaking actually after this. One's talking about how to design your own courses in sort of these environments, focusing on non-professional educators, and the other is talking about analytics that we have built. As I said, that we're more on the research side. So I'm a database researcher. So she's also talking about how we actually built our own analytics platform, sort of the beginning of that process. So I'm done.
Cool. No, that all sounds very interesting. We have sort of three very different deployments. I think Pierre, who's sort of most closely tracks the kind of work we do at edX.org, which deploys on AWS, and with Christy's stuff on Azure. What kind of, I'm curious from all three of you, what would you say were unique problems that you ran into where you're like, hey community, here's a thing, and they're like, I don't even know where to start with what you have. Did you run into any of those problems? What kind of things were strange or different that?
Well, my main problem was at the beginning because, I was a sysadmin for a long time. Then I went into security for 13, 14 years, and then I came back to sysadmin to work on OpenEDX. Mm-hmm. So it was like learning back Linux, Python, Ansible, learning AWS. So it was like quite a big road to get to in order to get my first instance in EC2. Mm-hmm. But no, the biggest problems are really small things like, all our courses in French, so I ran into a lot of Unicode problems. Mm-hmm. I ran into a few translations problems with Transifex. So, but no, the only thing I can say that took me a while to install was Insight on a separate server, and especially not knowing what was going wrong when I was trying to use OAuth with my LMS, and then realizing at one point, oh, did I forget about time synchronization? And then you put NTP on it and you go, this will work, will it? And it did.
Yeah, NTP is one of those things that we've had a lot of groans with, especially as we move more into using OAuth between all the different apps.
Exactly.
Just don't forget it. It's one of those little things that will just like, why can't I log into anything? It's just like, that's because people think you're off by like 10 seconds, and that means your tokens don't work anymore. So thanks, bye. What about you, Christy? Do you have like strange Azure things that you ran into? Are you running Ubuntu on top of Azure?
Yeah, we're running Ubuntu on Azure.
Okay.
So I'm hearing a lot of similarities in some of the talks. I think the ramp up is also a big thing, especially for maybe people that are more used to being a .NET developer. So definitely the ramp up and the complexity of the system is a big thing. Also, we did get a kind of key start from like AppSembler helped us out with creating the initial versions of our templates to deploy the actual kind of set up the infrastructure and give us the foothold of the initial introduction to Ansible. Mm-hmm. And then, we've taken it from there and we're running the pilot right now on Cypress, but we're moving our templates to actually deploy to Dogwood. Mm-hmm. And so, we're hitting some things like, the Ansible playbooks, for instance. A lot of them, like the sandbox, is geared toward a single VM deployment, and so that's another thing that we're hitting. And so, I'm looking at, as we move forward, I don't really want to, I'm going to have to fork the configuration repository, which scares me a little bit, but I don't want to diverge too much because I want, we're a very small team. I'm actually the only developer that's been on it since October full-time. We've had some other assistants as well, but it's a little scary to think about the maintenance that I'm going to incur if I diverge too much from the upstream. So really that's kind of one of my main concerns, and I am going to need to go into some of the Ansible to sort of allow it to kind of skip certain roles if it's local, if the DB, for instance, is not local host, or setting up the MySQL user to support hosts on different So things like
Yeah.
things like this that I'm sure everyone else that has been deploying on Google or OpenStack is probably running into as well.
Yeah, no, I think I was talking about this earlier with Braden, if he's in the crowd somewhere. There he is, yeah. We were just talking about this earlier, and about just being able to write more playbooks. And actually, Omar just submitted a PR to build for a playbook that essentially builds out all these stateless parts of the application, so putting databases and things elsewhere, but like deploying all the applications to one server as a playbook. And I think I would encourage you to try to push back those kinds of playbooks that you think will be valuable.
That's what I'm hoping to do.
Yeah.
I'm now working. So we've taken the single VM, the DevStack and FullStack templates, and I've actually put them on the Azure Marketplace now. So they're available if you go to the Marketplace under templates to deploy. I'm working on a multi-VM one now where you can actually scale out the number of application VMs. I'm working on cleaning it up and moving it to Dogwood so that that can be on the Azure Marketplace as well. But yeah, like ideally, I'd like to push back any modifications that I'm changing, contribute them, and yeah, I'd love to see us getting to the point of automation and continuous delivery and such like that as well.
Cool, cool. What about you?
Sure. So we have a relatively small team, I guess, that deploys and maintains these systems. We also have a large diversity in the type of systems and how they're deployed and where they're deployed as well. I mean, one of the challenges is there are just a lot of pieces with OpenEdX, with the platform, lots of pieces of software that work together. So when you're working in an environment where you have resource constraints, say that you've got, you can only use so much power, you can only use so much bandwidth, it becomes difficult to, say, remove certain components of it because they're all well integrated. So that's sort of one technical challenge, I guess, that we face. The other, and this is sort of alluded to in the previous panel as well, is what we call these incremental updates, which is, if we do 1 week of a course in a place without internet, we can kind of do the one thing because you can export your VM, and as long as you have some sort of virtual machine software on your tablet or whatever it may be, you should be able to load it and deploy it, and we can change the host files and stuff like that to trick it into thinking it's talking to the internet. But doing the increments in a non-kludgy fashion, I think, is something that we're still trying to work out. I don't mean to say that people haven't been able to do incremental updates, but I think the big thing is something that's relatively easy, and again, you're trying to deploy this to people who are non-technical. So in any way expect, so these people, you want to be able to give them the instructions, say, press this button, and, everything should just kind of happen from there.
Can I ask, what do you, can you elaborate a bit on what you perceive as incremental? Because it sounds like, Christy, you're trying to stay mostly on the named releases. And I think, Pierre, that's sort of where you are as well.
Yes, that's where we are, but we have our own forks, so we can make some local modification. It's really at the time of the rebase that I have some problems, for example, with the POs and the translations, because we had to upgrade what Transifex was doing for the French translations. But for the most part, it's not really that difficult, and I know that for Dogwood, I helped a lot with Ned with the migration script, so.
Yeah. You were going to say something, Christy?
I was just going to say, ideally, I would be, right up with the current release, updating, automatically, maybe have another, branch or CI, monitoring the upstream. But, due to lack of resources, we can't really do that.
Right.
And I guess I'm sort of talking at it from, one is from the OpenEdX platform releases itself, but I also mean in terms of the course content.
I see.
Updating the course content very easily in terms of, we've got a new video today, or we'd like to modify. I think in the previous panel they said technology is changing fast enough, and that's probably true, or research changes fast enough where results that we presented 6 months ago, we might want to replace those results as we're deploying it to people. And I think those are some of the challenges that we've been facing. I think apart from that, obviously, is, and these will sort of be talked to by some of my colleagues, Julie and Lauren, in the next talks, of just how do we get people to create courses who've never taught an online course before, or don't have the 6 months and the large budget to set that aside, as well as.
But you all also, all three of you mentioned sort of the number of components, which I don't disagree with. But if you were to give somebody advice who was just starting off about, where to start or which components are sort of the big things to be looking at first, where would you start?
So for us, I mean, we're sort of there are certain components that we aren't using. So we're not using forums, for instance. We're actually, our content team has been creating sort of a Yammer discussion that's linked in from the course. And so we were able, that actually helps us out because it's one, portion of the architecture that we can just kind of ignore. And we're also not running insights yet. We have deployed it to an Azure VM, but we haven't actually played with it enough to really get anything useful out of it.
And with insights.
So I think just focusing on the core, like CMS and LMS, for the time being is just a good way to get started.
Makes sense. So just deploying the CMS, turning off the forums, getting that as your sort of baseline, understand that, and then you can add on the other components as you go. Because even with that, you're talking about, if you want celery workers to be able to do async stuff, that's already 2 or 3 pieces of infrastructure that you have to understand, and you have to decide whether they'll go in the same place or on separate machines, and all the fun stuff begins.
And that's one of the reasons why we put Insights on a separate server at the beginning, because it was kind of difficult to install because I was trying to follow the instructions from the different repos, then found on the wiki the instruction that Stanford had made to create it on one server, so I followed it, and it went really well after I found out my NTP problem. But right now we also have we're trying to install Auto, or the e-commerce part, and we have to write our own module for our own payment processor. So we were able to do it recently, so it's still in test, but we might be using it as soon as Eucalyptus is out.
Sure. I did want to mention, I'm going to keep asking questions if people have questions. We do have 2 floating mics, so just raise your hand and Eddie will come find you. And yeah, so just FYI, so if you guys are thinking of things, please ask. So the next thing sort of I'm curious about is what sort of strategies you guys use for your deployment. So it sounds like, Vijay, you have different kinds of deployments in terms of so you can take more downtime because it's completely separate from things. What do you use, rolling deployments or blue-green or?
So we have, for the most part, so as you're probably aware, there's a lot going on at MIT in terms of there's sort of the MIT X, which is a sort of centralized, the edX platform. And there's also this open edX work, which we're doing. And they're very different types of courses and stuff like that as well, which are going on in those. For the most part, when we deploy something, it stays deployed unless you need a major update. And that's something I think we'd like to work on and change. But that's where we are right now, when we basically hand someone a DVD that's got something that you can just go from there. Again, like I said, we're in environments where we can't send too many updates. So yeah, once we give it to someone, that's how it is. We don't usually go back and update it.
What about you, Chrissy?
Yeah, so I don't know if I can give too much of an update story. We're still early on in the game, and so we've really got the one deployment of our first pilot.
And it's happy, so
it's running great, and everybody's happy with it. Yeah, we're in our second session of the pilot course. We've had invited, I think, 1,500 people to each run, and we've got 500 to 600 active students. So yeah, so far so good. So far so good.
What about you, Pierre?
In my case, we made a conscious decision to be following the named releases, but I participate to the monthly DevOps calls, the Hangout with the edX team. But we do try to keep our test environment as close as the name releases is, and when we do the migration, it's about 1 week after the name release is released. Okay. So that's pretty interesting. And we've been able to do the migration from Aspen to Birch to Cypress and then to Dogwood, so there's not really big problems that happen. There are some things that breaks, and sometimes that's because we made some modifications in our fork, but then it's all with the community and the mailing list, and now Slack, it's easy to ask a question, what changed, and then you figure out, oh yeah, this changed. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, and I know you were quite integral to finding so many tiny bugs in Dogwood when we were trying to get that out. Between you and Ned, they were just back and forth fixing things, so it was super helpful.
Thank you.
I really appreciate that. It made my life easier. But no, I think there's lots of different things, and especially with the named releases, one of the things I've noticed is that because they're bigger and there's like larger migrations, big feature changes happen. So like discovering all those tiny pieces becomes a lot harder, and we've been trying to improve our process in doing that. What kind of what kind of security constraints do you guys have in terms of sort of access and managing and credentials? How do you manage your credentials for your databases? Do you care who what does security look like for you guys? I'll just leave it at that.
Well, for the time being, we have our database on the back end, so we didn't want to have the database accessible from the internet. And we also added the third-party authentication so that people could access it or link their credentials with Google, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. I know that at one point edX had removed the OAuth 1 consideration, but we were still using the Twitter feed, so it's like, okay, we need a fix. But security, we follow the edX security mailing list. We try to implement it as soon as possible. Sometimes that's demands to add a maintenance window in the following weekend. And because we're lucky, because some of our users, because they are francophones, most of it are in Canada or in Europe or Africa, so maintenance windows can be done, let's say, relatively easy in the middle of the night EST time. So.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so we're kind of the same, running our DBs on the back end. I mean, we may still have SSH to them open, but we've changed, we've set the root passwords on the database and changed the passwords, trying to just lock down and minimize the entry points. And on the edX mailing list for the security notifications, we also are on a mailing list for Azure Linux security, and so we get the Ubuntu security notices. We're on Ubuntu 12. Right now I'm doing manual patching for it, but there is a automated way of doing it, and for Azure Linux as well with an extension.
So we have a number of things that we do for security. One, the ultimate security is, of course, sometimes it's on computers without internet access, which is great. Very difficult to hack into that system if it can't connect to anything. Also very difficult to deploy courses on something if it can't connect to anything. So that's one security mechanism that we employ. But that's not, but beyond that, we often have material that we cannot share that might be geographically restricted. You can think of certain technologies which cannot be, that somebody might be doing a course on a particular technology that can't be shared with everyone across the world. So we do sort of IP-based firewalls where we might allow only certain geographic locations, or we might have people actually reach out to us prior to and sort of be verified by a person, ensuring that they are allowed to take our course. So that's sort of one piece of it. We, of course, follow, I think, most of the practices that both of you mentioned on keeping the databases and stuff like that locked down and password protected. But I think for the most part, it's really about the access to the management, to the course itself, that we try and do some security on.
And you're on the security mailing list as well?
I'm our administrators are.
Yeah. Do you guys find that the 2-day grace period for applying those patches before they public, how useful is that to you guys, or is that something that if the patches were public, it wouldn't, what are your thoughts on that? Could it be longer? Should it be shorter?
I think it's fine like it is right now, because the first thing you need to do is look at what the patches does, or the content of the patch, if it's easy to implement or not, if it needs a restart of the system or not. But most of the time, the patches have been really, really small, except for one for which I had a lot of problems, but that was because I was trying LTI, and there were some patches for LTI at one point, and I had to back away from that patch and wait for Dogwood for it to be fixed, but it was kind of features that we haven't yet implemented or put into production, so it was like, okay, I can wait.
Okay.
But it was a conscious decision,
Right.
And as a security professional, it was like, okay, I'm taking or assuming the risk here.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Giving you the option to assume the risk.
Yeah.
Right. And you're all using the Ansible configuration to do your deployments?
Yeah.
Do you use do you just have a local copy of it or a fork that you keep your secrets in? Do you pass those in when you're running? How do you manage that?
We pass it when we run it, because the only thing with my configuration repo does is like changing the sandbox.yml so that it reaches out to, or it's pulling out my own repos instead of the edX repos. So
Gotcha.
I know I had a little bit of problems with that at the beginning, but that was a long time ago. That was with Aspen, but now it works real fine. So
Cool. Do the rest of you guys use sandboxes as well? Or?
Yeah, so like I said, initially AppSembler helped us with building the templates, and so we were initially using their fork of the configuration repository. But as I take our templates and migrate them to Dogwood, I'm trying to, well, I was hoping to sort of point directly to the edX configuration repository, but now I'm actually forking and just trying to make mindful modifications to it in a way that maybe they can be contributed back, and kind of separate out what we need into a isolated playbook so that it's not getting into some kind of managed.
Right. Yeah, and I think that there's like the role path configuration in Ansible, which makes that a lot easier. So one of the things that we've done for some private roles that we've needed for sort of other deployments is that we have just another repository that has other playbooks and other roles in it. Yeah. And then with the Ansible config, you can actually point it to the master of configuration for the default roles for the core stuff. So it allows you to sort of do your customizations on like as a sidecar to the rest of the repository instead of having to make the changes like in place where possible.
We've also got some PowerShell sitting on top of the Ansible because with deploying to Azure, then we're using Azure PowerShell that actually deploys the templates. And so, I have the choice to make of whether I want the kind of setup to go in sort of in the PowerShell deployed scripts versus in Ansible. And so,
can you talk a little bit about these templates? It sounds like they're sort of an Azure-specific template thing.
Yeah, it's running Azure Infrastructure as a Service. So it's a Azure Resource Manager templates, and it's basically a way of defining in JSON format what your infrastructure looks like. And so you'll have like a VM as a resource. You'll have the public IP address as the resource that's connected to the VM. You'll have the setup for the virtual network and the security group and such.
Right. So it sets up your network topology and your infrastructure for you. I think, we were using CloudFormation for that on AWS. Is that what you were using, Pierre, before?
No,
How did you bring your
I tried using it. I had problems using it. I do have the template for my current configuration because in CloudFormation you can download it. So if ever there was a big problem, I could probably reinstall it through CloudFormation with that template.
But you don't bring up new infrastructure using that. How do you usually manage infrastructure and network level sort of security and management?
Yes, they're playing with the security groups, both at the instance level and at the VPC level. So,
but you're just doing that manually directly?
Yeah,
Okay.
manually. Yeah.
Cool. How about you guys?
So we have our own configuration that we set up. We actually have a VM hosting infrastructure that we've developed on an HPC system, and that has group level permissions. So basically, we can launch whatever we need in that VM hosting environment, including the OpenEdX as a VM, and that's controlled with sort of the Linux level permissions that actually control then how the VM itself and who can access what data sets and who can access what data as well.
That makes sense. It's one of the things that we've been playing with for that recently is Terraform as a way of managing some of those resources. And I think there are Terraform, like you can define Terraform plans for Azure at all. I don't know if you've looked at that at all. So it's a very interesting way of having all that configuration as code. It sounds similar to what you're talking about with the templates and what CloudFormation used to provide on the AWS side, but I think like a bit of a cleaner interface and a bit more modular. I'm curious to know, and there's no questions, right? Just making sure. Cool. You guys just, this is good. I think a slightly awkward silence causes people to actually ask their questions, so.
Actually, I'm interested to know specifically for MIT, when you say you want content updates, like how do you actually see that? Like your ideal situation, how do you want that to actually work?
So the ideal, I guess, and I've don't mean to speak for the rest of the group. From my perspective, I think the ideal situation would be something like we're able to do, let's say we're able to deploy the infrastructure and some part of the course to an environment. So you could think of, places where you don't have internet or power, right? So you could put it on a tablet, you could take it out to this environment. And then what I'd like to be able to do is go in a week later with just a system, again, without the internet, but maybe it has the next round of coursework or the next round of lectures, and be able to automatically update the systems over there, again, without having to recompile and rebuild the entire thing and send it across. Again, I know that there are tools out there to do this, but I guess having that where it's seamless, again, in an environment where people may not be able to, or may not have the technical background to update this on their own. And you could look at 30, 40, 50 of these instances, so having one person having to go there and physically do it for each one could be very, exactly, you almost kind of, almost want to set up a router in the middle of this thing, everyone comes close to it, and their course is now updated. That's the ideal situation. Does that sort of answer your question, or would you like it at the next level of detail? Or?
Yeah, that helps.
That helps? Sure.
Anybody else? Yeah.
So I know you guys spoke briefly about security and credentials and things along those lines. I'm wondering if any of you are, do you version your API keys for the different services you use? I'm thinking specifically about like the AWS keys, SMTP credentials, the YouTube API key. Do you have any strategies for that, for keeping it secure, versioned, offsite, or do these keys just exist in one place?
That's a good question.
I know, and it's something we've been working on, and we don't have a good solution.
We don't have a good solution. We change the keys on a regular basis, but we also have, because we created scripts and everything, so there are copies that are well protected on the servers in the S3 configuration files or even in Boto files and things like that. So sometimes when something breaks, it's because we didn't change the keys in one place, but we have a list of locations where the keys are, so we know where we need to update them when we change them.
We don't use any of those services, so it keeps it secure. So we don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
We still need to kind of look into that.
Yeah.
We are looking at moving off YouTube and trying to secure video content more. So, of course, being Microsoft, and we're looking at Azure Media Services.
Yeah, sure.
Can I ask a question of the audience? I know
Sure,
it's sort
sure.
of,
No, go for it.
Oh, this is the Open edX, right? The flipped
Yeah,
panel
yeah,
or something
yeah.
like that. How many people here cannot share their content with, I guess, the world? Like, so content that you're creating, how many cannot share the content with the world, or even a very wide? Okay, so yay, like 5 of us. That's great.
Yeah. To get back to your original question a little bit, just to give a perspective from the edX side, one of the things we do is we actually do have we have a separate repository for managing our secrets that we pull in when we're building the images for our infrastructure, for our actual applications. So when it comes time to build the infrastructure on a secure server, we have both the configuration repo plus our secrets repo, and we pull out the information from both. It gets merged along in Ansible as 2 separate sort of data files.
Yeah, actually, this was a question that I wanted to ask, but I also have the answer. We've been working with Ansible Vault, which allows us to store credentials in encrypted, GPG encrypted files, which are decrypted at the runtime of the Ansible playbook.
Right.
So this allows you to have secure credentials.
Yeah, we've looked at that as well, but then you just commit that Ansible Vault file to a private GitHub repository.
Or a public one.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
How much do you trust GPG? Yeah. Yeah. No, I think once it's GPG encrypted, I think that allows you to be the dangers around those that I have seen are forgetting to encrypt things, or encrypting the wrong things and accidentally leaking passwords, and then you have to start rotating your passwords. And do you get like password rotation plans and policies? Do you guys have any in place, or is that the thing you're thinking about right now?
It's something that we will need to think about, but it's something that's being done, I would say, manually right now and on a name release basis.
Gotcha.
So we have a sort of non-password based. So what we do is we do IP based. We allow people access to our instances, at least certain instances, based on the IP address that they have. So what we first do is we have them actually create a connection with our HPC system, set up passwordless SSH between them. In that process, their IP is then whitelisted, and then that's sort of how. And then they can use their usual username and password or email address and password to log in. That's sort of one way we do authentication rather than opening it up to everyone.
I guess I'll ask a question. I'm holding a mic. Okay. So first, anecdotally, I used to use Ansible Vault, and the question of what do you do with the Vault password as yet another secret you have to then manage. I used to have a Post-it note in a safe under my desk with the Ansible Vault password. So there are many ways to manage secrets. My question, though, is totally unrelated. So earlier we were talking about Yammer and other replacements for some of the services within the platform. I'm curious to hear each of your perspectives on integrations. I know, especially with operations, integrations with other systems comes up a lot. So what is one system that isn't part of OpenEdX, the OpenEdX platform, that you've wanted to integrate with but haven't been able to?
Well, in my case, it was something that was the reverse. We wanted to integrate, for example, passwords from the previous system that we were using, which was Sakai. So we had to create a routine that would simply take the password that the users were going to input into edX and then regenerate it in order to create the hash that would compare with the Sakai password, and then change the password to the encryption algorithm that is used in edX. So that took a little bit of time, but because we needed to add a Java component that would run everything. So that was a little bit difficult, but we were really helpful because the previous users who were on the previous platform were able to log in edX without any hitch. So that was interesting.
Yeah,
Right.
so for us, I mean, I mentioned a little bit, I think, some of the integration that we're looking into. I mean, not necessarily Yammer, we're using that on the side for discussion, but not fully integrated. But we are, I mentioned, looking into using Azure Media Services as a video player as opposed to YouTube, looking into possibly Azure Active Directory for authentication. Right now, we're just, for the pilot, we're using the out-of-the-box, user password from OpenEdX. And, yeah, so with the video one, it's sort of interesting because, if we create an X block for it, so we also have I think a couple of X blocks that have come out of like Microsoft OpenTech and Office as well as ways to integrate Microsoft Office documents or PowerPoints into the courseware. And one interesting discussion that we had that came out of that is in integrating the X blocks, everything kind of appears up under the advanced
settings,
button,
yeah.
and there's not really a way to sort of customize the API very well to say, okay, we're putting in support for Azure Media Services. I would like that to be on the video, but because if our content authors are going to be using that as a primary source for the video, then that would be nice to be able to sort of customize that. Being able to maybe, we discovered a hack to get rid of the forums tab since we weren't using the edX forums is manually deleting it from the content exports and then re-importing it. So there's a few kind of points where the UI could maybe be a little more extensible to help out with these integrations.
So as you're building out these components, having a story for how you are going to manage those components after they've been integrated or as they're being integrated into your content.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Good, cool.
I have a question for everyone.
Yeah.
If you're using named releases, who here would like more frequent releases and who would like less frequent releases?
All right, so let's see. More frequent releases.
Not many.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Less frequent releases. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right. And so the rest of you guys just don't want releases at all. Steve, yeah. Right. Right.
Yeah, yeah. I would be curious to know who would like fixed date releases, like every 6 months, for example, versus whenever we fancy it.
I think that would be useful for us.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that would be helpful for us in terms of, I guess, planning resources in advance so we know when, through a year, we need to have people, our admins, sort of concentrate on this. That's one thing I can think of off the top of my head.
Sure. Go ahead, Braden.
Just to comment, something that I would love to see more of is a bigger feature freeze before each release and more emphasis on, hey, everyone, let's really test the hell out of this release and let's all work on fixing the bugs.
Okay.
And that's something that would be really helpful for us.
How would we better, and this is maybe a question for you guys and for you guys, how would we better engage the community in that testing? When Net is sending out the named releases, we don't get a lot of responses on, hey, I tested this part of it, and it's like, except for Pierre. So how do we get the rest of you to engage? Like, do you guys have thoughts about how it would be easier for you to consume named releases?
I have a thought. Make it really easy for people to do, because I think part of it is that it's difficult enough to build the release. I mean, we're on Dogwood now, so it's not as difficult. When we first started, it was before they were named, and then we kept moving. And again, because we're not connected to the internet, we have to bring everything in. It's a little trickier.
Okay.
So really good documentation would be fabulous. And documentation isn't the same as, so at some point you're gonna have to go to a place where this is turnkey for people in order to get wide adoption. So in order to do that, you have to get to a point where you're actually creating for users, this is a really clear way and path of doing this. I think if that is there at the same time that you have the release, and sometimes it's hard to tell whether it's an open edX document that I'm reading or an edX document. Okay. Clarify that. People might, if it takes less time and less effort on their part, they might be more willing to build it and test it.
Sure, sure. All right. All right, we'll take the last one from Steve, and then I think we'll call the session to a close. There's a Birds of a Feather later on operations and deployment, so come find that. If you guys have more questions or comments or just want to tell me about things that we could be doing better, I'm happy to hear all of that. Go for it, Steve.
Yeah, just as a follow-up on that, so I think, so one of, like I said, we stopped adopting and switching over to named releases, and part of that, I think, was our experience with Aspen and then Birch. So I think a big way to get more engagement on testing from the community is to have more initial testing on edX's side. So I know that was the big problem with Birch, was I jumped in and, similar to Pierre, fixed a bunch of things, but then it got to the point of, yeah, I mean, who's doing the QA here, right? Sure. And so then it simply wasn't, it wasn't time beneficial for us to be debugging that, so we stepped away from it. So I think if there's more of that, that could help.
That's very helpful. Thank you. All right. Want to thank all of you guys for coming up here. Being in front of Spotlight is always a little stressful for me, so I appreciate you coming up here. Thank you all again. Please give them a hand.